I'd like to call to order our annual meeting. As most of you know, we're without clergy today. Asa is away at a diocesan youth event at Crossroads, and Susan picked up an illness last week and is at home recovering. And she sends her regrets for missing our meeting, and right back to her, we send our love and prayers for her speedy recovery, and we will definitely miss her today. Let us open with prayer. The Lord be with you. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. And I'd like to appoint Marilyn as clerk to the annual meeting. And do we have the agenda? Yes. Next, we'd like to present minutes of the 2022 annual meeting.
Warden, I move we waive the reading of the minutes of the 2022 annual meeting and accept them as submitted by the clerk.
John has put that motion forward. I need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Kathleen. All those in favor? I think the ayes take it. In case you don't know me, my name is Chris Wild. I'm a warden here at Grace, along with Kathleen Hauer. And Stacy and I have been attending Grace since the fall of 1997, which makes today roughly my 26th annual meeting. Maybe I have missed one or two along the way, but I've always felt that these meetings are important. It is critical that we review our business life together periodically. And for many of these 26 annual meetings, I've been a part of the leadership team, either as a vestry person or as a warden. So I do feel as though I have the perspective that understands the operational side of Grace Church. As we sit here together in February of 2023, I can say with certainty that this is one of the most exciting and hopeful times for Grace that I can remember. It's not to say that we don't face our share of challenges. We are not perfect. We have work to do. And it's not saying Grace 2023 is any better than Grace 2016, or Grace 2009, or Grace 2004. But in terms of where we were and where we have come from, not just as a church, but as a country facing a historic pandemic, I am as excited about the future and what we are capable of doing as any time in the last 26 years. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about why it is such a great time to celebrate Grace. The first reason to celebrate Grace is that even in the face of national trends that point to marked declines in church attendance, we continue to attract new individuals and families. I did a little analytical research several weeks ago. In our sacristy, there's a big red book, and it's where the clergy track all our services. They keep track of the number of people that attended, the number of people that took communion, and I looked at each Sunday, starting the Sunday after Labor Day, and I added up the number of Sunday attendees running through the end of the year, December 31st. We had roughly 10% more this year than the prior year. I figured it was just people transitioning from live stream to in-person. So I looked at our YouTube, and I found pleasantly that over the same time period, our viewership online was up similar 10%. And while that may not sound like much on the surface, it defies almost every study performed on church attendance. Recently, the Institute of Family Studies published a study showing a 6% decline in church attendance over the last 3 years. Gallup, the famous polling firm, says that only 47% of Americans now say they belong to a church. That's down from 50% in 2018 and 70% in 1999. Here at Grace, that is not the case, as we added roughly 20 new families to our membership rolls in the last 2 years. And as you will hear shortly, we're not quite at the stewardship levels we'd like to be, but 2023 marks the third straight year of increasing stewardship. And before we are finished with this year's campaign, we believe it will reach its highest dollar total since 2017. I think we have always been big believers in Kevin Costner's famous Field of Dreams quote, "If you build it, they will come." There is no better example of this than what Dr. Ann has done with the music program at Grace. Starting from the youngest and chapel choir, to the children's choirs, to the adult choir, to all the special musical offerings here at Grace, there is no other program that better attracts newcomers. Catherine McManus is building a similar magnetic program with our Christian education. I don't think it's a coincidence that both Dr. Ann and Catherine are well known throughout the Madison community. Walk through the halls of Madison Junior School or Madison High School and mention either of those names, and you're likely hear, "Oh, I know her." Further, Father Asa has made big strides in rebuilding our older youth program with monthly activities and a very successful Holy Week youth event that attracted over 35 young members. With leadership from Han Wang and Angela Finlay, our tweens have engaged with their own set of fun activities. The second reason to celebrate Grace is that we continue to focus on an area that has always been important to Grace parishioners, and that is outreach. This past year, we gave roughly $80,000 to the Diocese of Newark to help them with their own outreach and operations. Separately, our grants committee gave $33,500 to 25 organizations with emphasis on providing a significant impact to their budgets. And I know for a fact that Grace provides 5% of the entire North Porch budget, which means we're making a noticeable impact on them. We also continue to support multiple organizations with Food for Friends and North Porch in-kind donations, including First Baptist in Madison, the Military Assistance Pantry in Patterson, St. Andrews in Newark, and Trinity Lutheran in Dover. Not to mention our world-class underwear collection, along with Thanksgiving turkeys and peanut butter. And whoever thought I could have gotten those three words in the same sentence. We truly are making a difference. Perhaps the most exciting thing with regard to outreach is that last summer we kicked off a working group with the goal of studying how best to fulfill our outreach mission. Chris Houck and a hardworking group have met half a dozen times and are examining what Grace outreach should look like strategically in the long term and tactically in the short term. In the coming months, they will share more of their findings and recommendations with the vestry, and then we will look to put the working group's ideas into action. We look forward to sharing the output of this working group with all of you, as we recognize it is an important element of our parish life. The third reason to celebrate Grace is that we are starting to see a return to fellowship and community building, which has always been one of my favorite aspects and something I believe sets us apart. This last fall, we had our first big fundraiser since the pandemic, the Oktoberfest auction. Coffee hours are in full force. There's a return of the chili cook-off scheduled for later this month. Events like Pizza Compline, men and women's groups, Halloween concerts, Vacation Bible School, Bible studies, and book groups are all helping us return to a state where we're spending more and more time together as a community. Finally, and perhaps the most important reason to celebrate Grace, is that I believe we have the leadership structure in place to successfully carry us far into the future. This starts at the top with Mother Susan. Perhaps the best part of being a warden is that you get to work closely with the rector. You see behind the scenes. You see vulnerabilities. You hear fears. You share in times of happiness and in times of sadness. You see what motivates and frustrates and what brings joy. You really get to know somebody. Susan is one of the warmest and most caring individuals I have ever met, not just because she's playing the role of priest, but because of who she is, deep down inside. She brings this to Grace every day, and we are truly blessed to have her leading our parish. She has a genuine, deep-seated love for our parish and everyone inside our walls. And she does it with a balance of humor that makes working with her a real joy. Father Asa has developed and matured into a fine priest, and he and Susan work exceptionally well as a clergy team. We have loads of talent across the staff and in the office, and leading key committees like Finance and B&G and our Vestry. I am very confident that we are in good hands for many, many years. In closing, I want to suggest 2 asks, and neither has to do with money, although we'll never turn that away. First, as we continue to expand our fellowship and community building opportunities, there is no shortage of ideas. Leadership frequently talks about all the things we would like to do. The constraining factor is not the ideas themselves, but frequently just not having enough volunteers to turn those ideas into actions. So if there is something at Grace that you feel very strongly about, please talk to Susan or Asa or a warden or a vestry member or somebody on the staff and offer some time to help. That will go a long way towards being able to execute on the many initiatives that we would like to put in place. And the second ask is this: let's continue to celebrate Grace. Let's be very intentional. Let's celebrate here, but let's also celebrate out there. Tell your friends that we have the best preaching, the best music program, the best Christian ed program, and the most fun events. And when you get home today, on the cover of your annual report, I want you to cross out the words annual report and replace that with the word celebration. Because this document is truly a celebration of the remarkable work that we are doing here and in our community, and something we should continue to celebrate and be extremely proud of. The feeling I have at Grace today is much like when Stacy and I first started at Grace 26 years ago. There's an excitement and promise and hope of what's to come. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Wow, I'm excited about Grace. I would like to present the work of the nominating committee and the slate put forward. So the following people will be electing this morning to the various positions. For Vestry, class of 2026, 3-year term, there's 4 seats: Andy Bolt, Peggy Potter, Mark Sacker, and Heidi Griffey, who will be stepping in for Han Huang, who is stepping down from Vestry. For the deputies to Diocesan Convention, we have John Gard and Allison Gard as the class of 2024, with an alternate of Mike Castile for the Diocesan Convention.
And for a second 2-year term as warden, Kathleen Howard.
With that, we'd like to elect this following slate if there are no objections. So,
I move to close the nominations and have the clerk elect the slate unanimously.
okay, could I have a second for that? Second, Mike Cullen. All right, and can we close the elections with the following slate? Thank you, Marilyn. We'll note that in the minutes. Also, I'd like to give a couple of words of thanks for Han and his work on Vestry. He's been fantastic over the last 18 months, working to restore our coffee hour after the pandemic. He's led a number of youth programs for the tween group and gotten a real head of steam and momentum behind that group. And as well as the many other things that he has done for Grace. Also pushing forward for a sort of revamp of our website and the opening page, and lots of vibrant pictures of our community and people in our doors. So those are some of the things that he's accomplished on Vestry. So thank you, Han, for your work, and let's give him a round of applause. And I'd like to welcome Heidi Griffey onto Vestry. She brings with her a wealth of knowledge about our wider community in her work with Nourish NJ, and we look forward to all the insights she will bring to our vestry. So welcome aboard. With that, I'd like to welcome Andy Bolt, our chair of our finance committee, to review some of the finances of the church.
Thank you, Kathleen. In front of you is the Treasurer's Report, which is essentially the income statement for Grace Church for 2022. The top two lines are what people of Grace give to Grace in terms of either pledge income or in other contributions, which may or may not be pledges. And you can see that we, in 2022, pretty far exceeded our budget. There really are two reasons for that. One, we had about 30 parishioners that gave more than they pledged. And I've had the opportunity to watch this over about a 5-year period of time, and I think that's the largest number of people who actually gave more than they pledged than we've had in that 5-year period of time. In addition, when we budgeted last year, there were some pledges that came in after the time that we finished the budget, and consequently we had a little bit higher base. So a really good result in terms of pledge income. Other church support approximated the budget. Chris mentioned our fundraisers. We really didn't know how to budget our fundraisers this time last year because we weren't sure what we were going to be able to do. We weren't sure how much we would be open and other things, but we did budget closer to the two events that we historically have had. We did have the one event that was very successful this year. So while we're below budget, we actually outperformed probably where we expected to be when we were mid-year last year. In terms of other notable things, occupancy, we did begin to raise our rent for the two schools. We had given some abatement during the COVID period of time. We began to move that back to a more normalized rent. And the same thing with Grace Counseling Center, which actually we weren't sure we were going to be able to rent the full year, and we did have income for the full year there. And then finally, the endowment transfer, where you see a favorable result on the endowment transfer. That's actually because we're the beneficiary of a trust, which is referred to as the Andy G income in our results. And that trust, the last 2 years, has given more than their historical rate. So we had a benefit of more coming in from the Andy G income. Our actual endowment, our Grace endowment, was exactly on budget. And just as a reminder, the Grace Endowment is a 5-year average of the performance of the endowment. So it's pretty easy to set what that budget is because it's a stagnant number at the beginning of the year based on the historical 5-year performance of the endowment. From an expense standpoint, pretty close to budget, which when you consider that the first quarter of last year, we really didn't know, again, how much we were going to be open, how much we were not going to be open, and things of that nature. We also were facing, after we finished budgeting, a much higher inflation rate. So when we did salary increases for the staff in the March timeframe last year, particularly the lower compensated people, a little bit higher than the average increases because of the inflationary environment. And then our health benefits, really just a difference in what we budgeted and the way that the benefits came through our church insurance for pension benefit, for healthcare benefits for our staff was a little bit higher than what we had budgeted. Other than that, the expenses were pretty much in line. We planned a deficit of $60,000, which none of us like. We came in at favorable to that number at $33,000. So in general, a good result for the year, although that deficit is something that we are still concerned about. Just a quick pictorial in the next slide. Kind of gives you a breakdown of where we spend money. You can see the big red component. Most of that is on the people that help run Grace. So it's the clergy, our professionals that run the music and education programs, and then also our office staff. And so that's the biggest component of our spending. You do see the diocesan share as the next largest component, and then maintaining our facilities in the B&G budget is the third largest. Looking forward to 2023, let me, just real quick, you're good, Judy, I'm confusing. Looking at our financial position, I'm just going to hit kind of the top two items here. When you look at our cash position and our endowment and cash and securities, that's really our resources. And you can see that we did, when we have an increase in cash, that's really a function of timing. It's really how many people prepay their pledges at the end of one year before the next fiscal year, and this year was higher than it was the year before. In terms of our endowment, we did see a decrease in the endowment, and Bruce is going to cover that in a few minutes in terms of more performance, but what we saw was a decrease in the endowment because of the performance in the financial markets, partially offset by some very generous bequests that came in and increased the endowment. Looking forward to 2023, Chris mentioned where we are on pledge income, so this is based on the pledges that we have at this point, and our realization rate historically has been around 97 to 98%, so it's budgeted about 97% of what is pledged, which is really, really outstanding. Other church support, fairly flat. Fundraisers planning the same type of activity that we had this current year. A little bit of increase in occupancy because of those increases that went in during the year last year. And then the endowment is pretty much based on that calculation that I mentioned and the historical performance of the two trusts that we have benefits from. Expenses, we are expecting higher expenses. I think all of us who are paying our utility bills know how that feels right now. So that we have planned in an inflationary increase. Our compensation is planned in at about 3%, or is planned in at 3%. Some of the benefits are a little bit higher than that based on the information we have from the diocese. But the inflation component is driving us back up. While our revenues are comparable to the prior year, we are expecting higher expenses. So again, projecting a deficit. And that is something that the vestry will be continue to discuss of ways that, that we can address this deficit and start to reduce or eliminate the deficit as we go forward. We are very fortunate at Grace that we have the ability to borrow from our endowment to fund the deficit, but that is not something that should be a permanent funding. That's meant to be a temporary funding until we can address the deficit. The last slide looks a lot like the one you saw before for the current year. Pretty much breaks down in terms of where we spend, when Grace spends its money, again with the personnel cost being the highest component. With that, any questions? Yes?
Have we finished paying off Grace Hall?
Good point, and I should have covered that in the balance sheet. And Judy, if we can go back to one second to the balance sheet component. You can see the under liabilities, the loan payable at the beginning of the year was $91,000. That was the remainder of the debt that was incurred for Grace Hall. That was paid off during this year and was paid off as one of the bequests that we received. We used that for funding of pay down of that debt. Thank you for that question. I should have covered it to begin with. You're a great straight man. Other questions? Well, thank you.
And now Bruce Rudin, who will cover the endowment.
Well, as you saw on the balance sheet, we did decrease our endowment, or the market decreased our endowment, unfortunately. But I think we all experienced that, and the world has experienced it. One of the things that we've done, though, is that we've segregated, as you can see, under the equity blend and under the fixed income, we've segregated out two different accounts because they're somewhat restricted. The Carl Memorial Fund, which has to deal with the columbarium, and the Surrey Lane, which is going to be designated at some point for a specific purpose. It has not been determined yet. And that's just from the sale of Surrey Lane, if you can see that. But we've broken them out, and so we can keep track of them, basically. I think that, being under the mercy of the stock market this year, or last year, We saw some recovery in the fourth quarter, and a little bit more in January, and I don't know what that is yet. We haven't had the final results come in. But I think who knows what's going to happen in this coming year with the threat of, or the supposed threat of recession. Whether that takes place or not, it doesn't look, it's up in the air at the moment, but in my opinion, it may not happen. If we go to the next slide, a little out of focus, but we at the bottom line, we lost about 16.5%. And generally, I'm on the DIT at the diocese, and the diocese actually lost about 18%, a little over 18%. So we've done pretty well, even though they're part of, we're a part of that. But it's the way we've broken up the different funds that we're in. And it only consists of two, one being a fixed income fund and the other an equity fund. But also, and you can see that not in focus, okay. But we've had a lot of activity, as you can see in the underneath where it says existing value current period, just below that, you add back to actually get the performance. We have to add back the cash outflows and take away the cash inflows. And it was pretty active this year because of the bequests that we've gotten during the years, and Andy had mentioned. But I think we're going to be looking forward to a better year this year. So far, it's up. I don't know who knows what it is at this point. We haven't got the numbers. But overall, I think we're in pretty good shape. It's a fairly large balance of almost $5 million, and I think that's going to go forward and increase. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to take them. Yes?
You mentioned that the diocese took let's call it an 18% hit,
Yes.
and we only took a 16%.
That's because we have our percentage in the equity market is lower.
I know it's probably perhaps a question that you can't answer, but should the diocese be following our lead instead?
Well, we all use TIAA CREF as the manager of the funds.
Okay.
But how much do you want to keep in cash and fixed income are two different things, and they have a different formula for that. So.
And because of the number of funds that we have to invest, it's a much broader scope. And
Right.
because of what some people want, there's more risk. We have
Mhm.
relatively small risk. There are some, when Bruce talks about 18, he's talking about the entire diocesan investment trust, some of which the diocese controls, some of which they don't. Okay. So that's the short answer to your question. We're more conservative than some people who invest in the
Right, it's true. It's true. And I think that's it in a nutshell. We keep our eye on it, obviously. So I think we're in good hands.
Next, Mike Petit will speak about our stewardship campaign.
Good morning, everybody. It's now time for everyone's favorite topic, stewardship. Sorry, I'll only use that joke a few more times, I promise. Anyways, as Chris Wild said earlier, definitely some areas for hope and excitement for the stewardship program this year. A couple areas that we were hoping to do better in, and again, in the sense of full transparency, I'll review both. Our improvement over year is minor at this point. I think we're at 488,000 last year and about 490 right now this year. So it's minor, but still a positive on last year, which is great. Based off of the broader financial situation here at Grace, we had set a target for ourselves at 525,000. And as we've mentioned a couple of times in this presentation, inflation has been something that's been hitting us all. So our major thrust this year was, instead of kind of going out and engaging, asking everyone to help fill that gap, rather to engage the broader community. We had taken a quick analysis looking at the number of names and families in the directory that you all were able to pick up today versus how many family units we were getting pledged. And I think we were seeing about half, if not a little bit better, in terms of people who were members of Grace that we had in our directory versus people who were pledging. So we made a real effort to try and engage the broader community, look at the people who had stopped pledging, and see if we could bring those back into the church and have that be the rising tide that lifted our boats to our goal of 525,000 this year. Unfortunately, the counteraction of that was, as we went through, some of the people who usually pledge a little bit late or shift from pledges to not pledges, we had a larger population of those this year, where people who had pledged the last couple of years had moved, either down the shore, up to New England, areas where, again, we call them Friends of Grace rather than pledgers and active members of our community. We still welcome them and still want to share our ups and downs with them, but we couldn't count on them to be pledgers. So a lot of the effort we put in to try and more broadly engage the Grace community was counteracted by, unfortunately, just an outflow of people from the area for personal and professional reasons. So the nice thing is, because last year we had an incredible outpouring of support and growth in our average pledge, that continued. We crested $3,000 as an average pledge last year for the first time in our recent history, and that continued to grow this year. So you take a situation where you don't have as many pledge units as you'd like, but your pledges grow, and you end up with the moderate growth that we had this year. So, no matter by the numbers, right now we've received about 152 pledge cards. That's about 10 less than where we were this time last year. So again, a minor impact, but not necessarily as large as it could have been. Now again, for those of you doing the math in the head, if we take the 10 pledge cards and our average pledge that I believe is listed in your program, we're at our pledge goal of 525,000. So we feel good about the goal we set. We fell short of the goal, and there's always a little bit of disappointment when that happens. But again, as long as the process is good and the process is realistic, it's something that we want to continue to maintain as we go forward. In terms of what this means for next year's campaign, what are some lessons learned from this year that we want to apply, is we feel like we hit on the right notes in terms of how to address the current financial situation and make sure that we're being transparent and honest and frankly realistic with what people are going through. Asking people to increase their pledge by 15% when the price of eggs are going up by about the same amount is almost deaf in terms of what's going on in the real world. So we want to continue to do that, but at the same time we want to continue to engage the Grace community, and not just during stewardship season. I think one of those things that we all recognize is when you get a call from a member of the vestry, a rector, or a warden in sort of that November to December time frame, it's kind of clear what we're calling about. We'll just be transparent about that. So more realistically, the thing that we should be doing both as a community and as a stewardship team is making sure we're reaching out in the Aprils, the Junes, the Augusts of the year, when people need us and people really need us as a community to engage. Because again, stewardship is, as you saw from some of Andy's previous charts, pledges is the largest chunk of that pie in terms of our revenue. So for us to succeed as a community, that chunk of the pie needs to continue to grow for us. But that said, we shouldn't just be reaching out when we're asking for money. We should be reaching out and engaging our community the whole year round. So without getting myself too far off of the stewardship mandate that I'm up here to talk about, here are our results. Unfortunately, we are short of where we wanted to be, but our target setting technique was a good one. We feel it was a successful campaign, and as Andy talked about earlier, we saw a nice increase in pledges that came in after we sort of snapped the line last year, and we're hoping for some of the same this year as we look at some of the folks who had not pledged, are active members of the Grace community, and just for whatever reason don't like going the pledging route. So I'll give everyone some time back. Any questions about stewardship? Thank you very much for your time.
Well, we've covered a lot today, and there's certainly a lot to celebrate about grace, as Chris pointed out. There's a lot of details and a lot of information in all of these slides, and it's all contained in your annual report. And if you don't have one in your hands, they're just outside the door, right there to the left. This is the part of the meeting, actually, that Susan was on the agenda to present her report of the last year and her outlook for next year. And hopefully she's at home. Hi, Susan. And I encourage you to read her statement closely and carefully, because she's got a lot of information in there, insights and thoughts about the past year. So please do that when you leave here today. Are there any general comments that anyone has or questions? Okay, well, anything. Yeah, and that's one of the things that the vestry is talking about in the ways that we're bringing programs back to life after the pandemic. So I appreciate your thoughts on that, and we will definitely take that on board. So thank you. I'm happy to supply some ideas with adult form. Okay, all right, thank you for that. Can you repeat that for you, Ruth's question is, she just wanted to point out that the adult forum we used to have in the past is was a wonderful channel to share information, different topics, and she would like to bring that back, as well as a continuation of a year-round Bible study after the Lenten Bible study. So those are two things that we will put on our agenda as the vestry. Thank you. Yes?
I just wanted, Jason Leffler, for those who don't know me, I wanted to say thank you to Mother Susan and Father Asa and the community for their prayer cards.
Well, thank you. All right, yes, and we're glad for that. So thank you to Mother Susan and Father Asa for the prayer cards. With that, if there are no more questions, I'd like to close with prayer. The Lord be with you. Almighty and ever-living God, ruler of all things in heaven and earth, hear our prayers for this parish family. Strengthen the faithful, arouse the careless, and restore the penitent. Grant us all things necessary for our common life, and bring us all to be of one heart and mind within your holy church, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I'd like to move to adjourn the meeting, or
I renew that motion.
so, move to adjourn the meeting? Second. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming.